Good morning, everyone. My name is Henrietta Bankole Olushino. I'm Vice President Africa at Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors. The first question I get most times is, are we the foundation? And we're not. We're from the same family. We came out of the family office 23 years ago as the advisory unit that was supporting the Rockefeller family office in determining strategic investments with for their charitable investments. And so today, 23 years later, we provide strategic advisory philanthropic infrastructure, as well as support foundations, family offices, ultra-high net worth individuals around facilitating their strategy, helping them develop their strategy, and actually actioning their strategy by helping them to think through more evidence-based strategies, as well as giving them the infrastructure to do that as well. We have deep expertise in systems change that we have experienced over time, impact investing, as well as trust-based philanthropy. And we're constantly building capacity in thought leadership, more recently around foresights and futures, and just imagining what philanthropy should be in the future and getting ready for that ahead of time. And we bring a unique lens to this conversation today because not only do we serve as a trusted advisor to funders and donors, we are also an intermediary working with civil society organizations, sponsored projects. Today we house or sponsor about 125 projects across the world and have moved over 4 billion in capital over the last 10 or 15 years, with over 700 sponsored project employees as well across the world. And so sometimes we also find ourselves as implementing partners as well, working on behalf of funders and actually implementing projects. So we see this from multiple sides, where we are supporting in terms of providing infrastructure. We are supporting projects that are down in the communities actually doing the work. Sometimes we're the ones doing the work ourselves. And it does give us a vantage position from both an operational and a thought leadership standpoint, and just being able to influence and study what works in philanthropy and what doesn't. And we have a myriad of thought leadership publications that we have done over time, including white papers, books, and things like that. But beyond that, our mission is really to accelerate philanthropy in pursuit of a just world. And for us, what that means is that we are helping to move capital to where it's needed the most, to the communities. I'm based in Lagos, Nigeria. I'm Nigerian, and I work from Nigeria, to the rest of Africa. But that's also a commitment in terms of what we believe, that the best solutions and the best people to do the work are those that are closest to the work. Thank you.
So good morning, everyone. I'm Jambo Binam. So my name is Tigmata Tenga. I'm here representing the Africa Philanthropy Network, and most of people who are sitting here are our members, and the Africa Philanthropy Network is a continent-wide network of organizations who are mainly and solely African-owned and African-led within the continent and its diaspora, who are working to ensure that we are promoting the voice and action for philanthropy in the continent. And just for everyone, our members seek to see just societies in the continent, and our mission is to reclaim and elevate the power of African philanthropic practices, believing that those practices are rooted in our way of doing things, in our way of speaking, in our way of eating, in our way of cooking, in our way of doing everything. But again, we need to work with the systems that have always decided to ensure that those ways of working are a little bit primitive and bringing new ways of working to us. So we are working through social systems change, and we are also working through economic justice, mainly, and those are cut across. Believing that, and how are we doing this? We are doing it by nurturing an infrastructure that can bring us together to be able to articulate a common voice and a common agenda. We have members currently who are with offices located in 41 countries in sub-Saharan Africa, and they work with and in 51 nations, in communities within 51 nations in the continent. And our members either issue-based or thematic-focused or sector-focused. So what do we mean when we say African philanthropy? It's not that we want to separate so much from the other philanthropies, but we say African philanthropy because here we are centering financial and non-financial resources. And when we reclaim and elevate the practices of ours, we mean we want to elevate our voice, which was for so long being suppressed. We elevate our ability to act. We are also elevating our resources. And one of the resources that is to be elevated is our own people. Mm-hmm. It's our own people, our own Africans. And here power plays in the form of urgency, our ability to act. We know that the act of giving, or the act of philanthropic giving, it's an act of power. So what we are working through this network is to make sure that we are questioning all the resources that we are having. We are saying it is important, yes, to have philanthropy to help us unlock our urgency. However, we need to interrogate on how these resources are given, to whom they are given, and how these resources are given to our people. Is it really to unlock their urgency, or they're given with different intentions? Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Sam Mugasha. I'm with an philanthropic organization called Imaginable Futures. Now, Imaginable Futures is a philanthropic investment firm out of the US, and it is born out of the education team that was within O Media Network. And some of you might be more familiar with O Media Network. And throughout this journey, we've really centered one question, is we've been driven by the question of how can capital actually be catalytic and not extractive. And in Africa, what this has looked like is we've backed early innovators in education and leaders such as Spark Schools in South Africa, Siavula, Ubongo International in Tanzania, Shofco in Kenya, in East Africa. And we've also backed innovative financing models and seeded them, such as Education Outcomes Fund. And not to mention, even more recently, we've supported ecosystem builders such as Zizi Afrique, who are here, Usawa Agenda, and others like Firelight, who we've collaborated and partnered with in Kenya. And more recently, one thing that we've been really excited about has been this opportunity of really unlocking African education research and shifting power in terms of who is actually making the decision of what gets researched. Currently, the statistics say that Africa research contribution to the global education research is only 3%. That doesn't mean that we are not doing our research, but what is being seen at a global level is only 3%. We want to change. If we want to finance change, the way we finance that change actually needs to change. And that's what I'm here to discuss, and I'm happy to talk about our history and go deeper into all of these innovative finance models at a much later time or on one-on-ones.
Thank you, Sam. Good morning, everyone. My name is Richard Johnson. I'm Chief Executive of an organisation called the Healthy Brains Global Initiative. We work globally. We have a particular interest in mental health. And of course, mental health is cross-cutting and touches every aspect of our lives. We're not a donor. We're not a service provider. We look to build the impact of services and systems, and we think the key to that is more robust, stronger performance management and a stronger focus on outcomes that matter to individuals, and we need to listen carefully to the voice of lived experience. We're looking to bring together funds from a number of donors, institutions, global donors, local donors, government, private philanthropy, to raise around $30 to $40 million. And over 3 to 5 years, we're looking to work with these girls to help them to achieve outcomes that matter for them. We will run a competitive process to select the service providers to deliver this program. Let's imagine 5 years from now, we gather the 75,000 girls who have left school during those 5 years in a football stadium in Nairobi, along with the babies on their knees. And we report to them on what we have achieved during those 5 years, demonstrating our accountability. Shall we tell them about the research reports that have been written, the randomized control trials that we have run? Shall we tell them how we've spent our money, how we've run some convenings, how we have built capacity across the system, how we've demonstrated perhaps fidelity to certain models, certain input models? Is that really what we're accountable for? I think we're accountable for delivering as many outcomes as possible for as many of these girls as possible. This is what we will pay for. This is what we will attach the money to. Every single one of the dollars of that $30 million must be connected as closely as possible to an outcome for one of those girls. And what those outcomes should be must be determined by the girls. We will ask them what matters to them, and that's what we will look to be delivered. I think that's accountability, and I think that is how we should determine how our funds flow and how our funds are connected as closely as possible to the front line. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everybody, for those introductions and that background information. I think we've got a strong shared understanding now of the some of the funding network, funding landscape. So, Stigmata, you talked about running an African-led organization that works with African-led organizations and how money flowing into Africa needs to be interrogated, I believe was how you phrased it. So, in your experience, how does the current funding flows into Africa reflect foreign priorities and not necessarily the needs of Africans? And what do we need to do to change that?
Wow, that is a very big question. And thank you for that, Chris. It's a big question, and I think the conversation since Wednesday, and I think some of us started in the afternoon of Tuesday, were responding to this question. The flows of funding have for a long time did not prioritize the needs of Africans. And unfortunately, the increasing number of institutions in the continent, because I was proud of saying there are many institutions that are promoting the way we do development in the continent, also followed the same way of flows of financing, and did not listen to the needs of the communities for quite some time. You know, in Africa, we oftentimes identify a problem for one person or a community, and then we sit together, we say, what is it that we need to solve the problem? And then we ask each other who can do what. And then later on, if at all there are no means that is within us, or no asset that is within us, then we go beyond us to seek support somewhere else. But because of the way development is done, most of the development aid was coming with an assumption that African communities kind of empty buckets or empty cups, and we have our resources that would go and fill and respond to all the problems and challenges and the needs of the continent. So going back to the roots, looking into what has worked before, which is many ways of mobilizing resources, asset-based practices in the continent, and use that to be able to do it. We think now, going forward, I think for us, and with all this discussion, Christopher and my colleagues here, we think that there has been different effort to see that more and stronger and evenly distributed institutions are required, which I agree with. But again, we have always been talking about finding the seat at the table. My worry here is that maybe that table is not for us. So I think for us going forward, we need to create a new table. We need to create a new table, use our way of mobilizing resources, pull what we have, asset and everything that we have as a capital, from the intellect to everything as a capital, and then invite others to edify and fill the gap. So that gap in financing we are talking about need to be identified and established by us in our table.
So I know this is not a short question, but hopefully you can give a concise answer. As you think about outcomes-based financing, outcome-based funding, how do you think about risk alignment and ensuring that the time funding to outcomes encourages innovation, doesn't stifle it?
So I think an outcomes funding model focusing on outcomes precisely is a way to manage risk and to facilitate innovation. I will give you a very quick example of where things go wrong in terms of why outcomes, I think, work better. I spent a long time working in Afghanistan, and whilst I was there was a USAID program. It was a WE program, Women's Economic Empowerment. It was $100 million. 2/3 of the way through, there was an assessment of how it was progressing, and they ascertained that 60 million had been spent. Everybody was very happy, big tick in the box. $60 million. They had helped 12 women secure employment. 12 women. Now, we can keep USAID whilst it's down, but this is the same everywhere. This is exactly the same in the billions of dollars that the World Bank invests in training, that the Global Fund spends on training, that governments across East Africa spend on training. As long as we focus on the inputs, we try to prescribe them from Washington or Geneva or Nairobi. This is what you must deliver. This is the risk that we create of significant underperformance, of a total failure of accountability to the people at the receiving end of these services. You de-risk this by attaching the money as closely as possible to outcomes. I de-risk the opportunity for money to be repatriated to the States, or for it to disappear at every point in various sorts of fraud. I de-risk the opportunity for fragmentation across my system. I focus on the outcomes that matter. And I create the opportunity for innovation, because I'm not going to tell you how to deliver. Sure, I'm going to come in every month and talk to you about how you're performing and what lessons we need to take, but it's up to you to create a model that works locally and to keep flexing it, to keep learning, to keep innovating, because I'm not prescribing your inputs. I'm simply focusing on the outcomes. And if we need some working capital or some cash to enable you to deliver ahead of the delivery of those outcomes, then there's various solutions that we can bring to provide that investment. But let's focus on the result, the outcome that matters for the individual, remove the risk, enable the innovation, enable the individualization of the service for each one of those people we're looking to serve. Thank you.
Sam, last question to you. Probably have time for one or two audience questions. Long-term sustainability. So it's been more than a decade now since Dan Blada had his famous TED Talk where he talked about how we don't fund charity the way we fund for-profit business. So we don't encourage compensation of executives who deliver results. We don't encourage marketing. And I'm wondering, as you think about how organizations should be funded, how much thought should go in at the early stages of that partnership to get the grantee to a point where they become self-sustaining, whether that's generating their own sources of income, whether that's getting them to a point where they've got alternative sources of funding. How do you think about incorporating that into your funding at the beginning of that relationship?
I think one of the solutions I've come to believe in, and I resonate with that TED Talk quite a bit, and I'll tell you why. One of the things I've really believed in is one route to sustainability is actually investing locally and those who are closest to the problem. And I'll give you an example. When Acumen did a study at the height of COVID to determine, like, they were looking at their portfolio, which ones are going to survive, which ones are surviving and which ones are not. And then after a couple of months, they realized the ones that were more resilient were actually the ones that were locally led, because they had nowhere to go. All the others, boom, they left, and they went back to their own countries to try and figure out what they're going to do. So I think one route to sustainability is actually investing in proximate and local leaders. Now, when you think about for-profit and non-profit and how you think about sustainability when it comes to a program, I appreciate what Stigmata mentioned about infrastructure. Because when you look at the infrastructure, you're building the foundation that helps that organization or those other organizations that are multiple exist and sustain themselves. So at Imaginable Futures, we moved away from what we call counting the butts in seats, which is the reach, how many people are in those classrooms, because we want to create an ecosystem that is self-sustaining and that is able to unleash 1,000 more organizations and have that base. And that's why when we looked at the local African Education Research Consortium, yes, we invest in individual research organizations, but we understand that collaboration, partnerships, working together, learning is important. But we also know that it is expensive and it needs to be resourced. So a number of us came here and we've talked about collaboration, working together, partnerships, and what you forget is that it costed you money to actually take that flight to come. It costed you time. And it has costed the human personnel because you're here and you're not in the office. So we need to begin to resource some of these things and buzzwords that we keep talking about. And when we think about it in that way, you're actually helping an organization sustain itself. And then when we talk about actually giving that control and power to a leader or an individual organization or a movement leader, whoever you want to call it, I won't also come and prescribe to you how will you sustain. I'll give you ideas in terms of, I've seen this organization do this, I've seen this collaborative do this, because I have that bird's eye view. But you're the one who's there, who's managing your team, who's engaging with government and all of these people. So I need to be able to trust that you will be able to deliver in whatever you want to deliver. We have agreed on the core metrics that we're going to track. So not metrics, I know we're moving away from metrics, but the learning questions and the learning frameworks that we want to go deeper into. So I'll leave it for that.
So maybe one or two questions from the audience. Let's wrap it up. Okay. It's only like 4 minutes. I mean,
if you can do it in 4 minutes, great.
No. Why don't we get everybody closing remarks? 1 minute. That's 4 minutes. If you could change, what's the one thing you would change most important thing, Henry, you can start.
If I could change one thing, or if I had a superpower, it would be to channel all of the funds that we absolutely need on the African continent to African-led organizations and African leaders.
If I could change one thing, would be to encourage my colleagues and tell them we all have power to change, and we need to celebrate what is ours and talk about what we do so that we can shape and reshape the narrative. The narrative cannot speak of what we have. Let's change and shape the narrative about what we do.
If I can change one thing, I think it would be to actually give a call to action to local philanthropy to actually own this and move forward with it. Because as much as we bash global, we are not the one to say that we move totally locally and do away with the global philanthropy. It's for us to work together and be at that new table that Timata is building together and at the same level. And if your funding can't survive the uncertainty that comes with the kind of work we want to do, then it's not going to be transformational.
If the table is broken, and you're building a new table, please do not build a table the same shape as the old one, which was a long rectangular table with the boss sitting at one end. Please build a round table, and in the middle of that table, put outcomes and focus on those outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the panel, particularly led very ably by Christopher Harrison, just to, first of all, truncate for a slightly longer session. I am aware that many of you have not had a chance to speak, and therefore, moving into the next session, we'll give you that opportunity as quickly as possible. We have a couple of announcements, then we're going to break for refreshments. Let me invite Eric Mani to just quickly make the first announcement. If you can hand in not a bottle of water, but a microphone. You almost got given a bottle of water.
Thank you. This is misusing my power completely. I'll be impeached. I want to meet a group of people who have been we've been meeting, and some of you have not perhaps had this. If you are a Rotarian, and I've met many Rotarians in this room, can we meet downstairs at the tea for 10 minutes, just next to the tea outside there? Or if you're interested to hear about Rotary, thank you.
Great, thank you very much.